In the dense, secluded forests of eastern Poland, a sinister plan was taking shape in late 1941. The Nazi regime, under the veil of war, was constructing one of the most efficient killing machines in human history. Sobibor, named after a nearby village, would become synonymous with death, secrecy, and the darkest depths of human cruelty. The selection of Sobibor's location was no accident. Situated in the Lublin district of occupied Poland, approximately 80 kilometers northeast of the city of Lublin, the site was chosen for its strategic advantages. SS-Obersturmführer Richard Thomalla, tasked with overseeing the camp's construction, recognized the area's potential. The dense forests provided natural camouflage, shielding the camp from prying eyes and potential aerial reconnaissance. More critically, Sobibor's proximity to the Chelm-Wlodawa railway line made it an ideal terminus for the trains that would soon bring countless victims to their doom. This railway connection was part of a larger network that the Nazis referred to as Sonderzüge, or special trains, dedicated solely to the transportation of Jews to extermination camps. Construction began in March 1942, transforming the peaceful woodland into a place of nightmares. The camp was built on a rectangular plot of land approximately 400 by 600 meters in size. The architectural design was a testament to the cold, calculated efficiency of the Nazi extermination process. Sobibor was divided into 3 main areas, each serving a specific purpose in the killing machine. This layout was similar to that of Treblinka and Belzec, the other 2 primary extermination camps of Operation Reinhard. The first area, known as Camp 1, served as the reception zone. Here, unsuspecting prisoners would disembark from the trains, still clinging to the hope that they had arrived at a transit camp or labor facility. This area included a ramp where trains could unload their human cargo, as well as barracks where victims were forced to undress and surrender their valuables. Camp 2 housed the living quarters for the Jewish prisoners forced to work in the camp, as well as workshops and storage facilities. These workshops, ironically named Himmelstraße, or Road to Heaven, were where victims' possessions were sorted and processed before being sent back to Germany. But it was Camp 3, hidden from view and separated by layers of barbed wire and dense forest, that housed the gas chambers, the beating heart of Sobibor's deadly purpose. The layout was designed to facilitate a smooth, almost industrial flow of human beings from arrival to extermination. SS-Obersturmführer Franz Stangl, who would later become the camp's commandant, described the process as a production line. It worked so smoothly. This chilling efficiency was no accident. It was the result of careful planning and a willingness to treat human lives as mere units in a deadly equation. Stangl, in a post-war interview with journalist Gitta Sereni, further elaborated on the camp's design. It was a cleaner and easier method of extermination than shooting people in pits, which had been the practice before. The construction of Sobibor was a cruel irony, as many of the laborers were Jews who unknowingly built the very facility that would claim their lives and the lives of their families. These workers, brought in from nearby ghettos and labor camps such as Wlodawa and Krakow, toiled under the watchful eyes of their Nazi overseers, unaware of the true purpose of their labor. Among them was Shlomo Schmeidzner, a teenage metal worker who would later become one of the few survivors of Sobibor. In his memoir, Inferno em Sobibor, Schmeidzner recounted the confusion and fear that permeated the construction site. "We worked like slaves, not knowing why or for what purpose. The Germans were always shouting, always in a hurry." Schmeidzner's skills as a goldsmith would later save his life, as he was forced to craft jewelry for the SS officers from the gold teeth extracted from victims. As the camp neared completion, the Nazis implemented stringent security measures to ensure their genocidal activities remained hidden. A double fence of barbed wire over 3 meters high encircled the camp. The space between the fences was filled with tangled barbed wire, making it nearly impossible to pass through. Watchtowers manned by armed SS guards dotted the perimeter, their machine guns trained on both the surrounding forest and the camp itself. Landmines were planted in the nearby fields, creating a deadly barrier for anyone attempting to escape or approach the camp. The perimeter was further secured by a network of tripwires connected to flares, which would immediately alert the guards to any escape attempts. To maintain the illusion of Sobibor as a transit camp, the Nazis went to great lengths to disguise its true nature. A small railway station was built, complete with a ticket counter and fictitious timetables. SS guards, when interacting with new arrivals, often wore railway uniforms to perpetuate the deception. This facade of normalcy was crucial in maintaining order and preventing panic among the newly arrived prisoners. The camp even had a small zoo visible to new arrivals to reinforce the idea that Sobibor was a civilized place. As survivor Thomas Blatt later recounted, the deception was so complete that some victims asked about connecting trains to other destinations. The first transport arrived at Sobibor on May 3, 1942. It carried 200 Jews from the Kraichau labor camp, marking the beginning of Sobibor's deadly operations. The victims were led directly to the gas chambers, where they were murdered using carbon monoxide from engine exhaust. This initial test run confirmed the efficiency of the camp's design and set the stage for the mass killings to come. Among the victims of this first transport was Josef Schreibmann, whose name is one of the few individually recorded from that day. Over the next weeks and months, the frequency and size of the transports increased dramatically. By June 1942, the camp was operating at full capacity, with trains arriving almost daily. SS-Obersturmführer Kurt Bolander, who served at Sobibor, later testified, "We could process up to 4,000 Jews in a day. The system was like a conveyor belt." One particularly large transport arrived on June 13, 1942, carrying 1,000 Jews from Krasnik, Poland. Within hours, nearly all of them had been murdered. The Nazi regime continually sought ways to increase the camp's killing capacity. In autumn 1942, they added additional gas chambers, allowing for even more efficient mass murder. This expansion coincided with the height of the Action Reinhard operation, the Nazi plan to exterminate Polish Jewry. The new gas chambers could kill up to 1,300 people at a time, using the exhaust fumes from a captured Soviet tank engine. The bodies were then burned on massive grills made from railway tracks, with the ashes often used as fertilizer in the camp's vegetable garden, a grotesque example of the Nazis' twisted efficiency. As 1942 drew to a close, Sobibor had already claimed tens of thousands of lives. The once quiet forest now echoed with the sounds of suffering and death, hidden from the world by layers of deception and the complicity of silence. On December 5, 1942, Heinrich Himmler visited Sobibor, praising its effectiveness and ordering further expansions. In a chilling entry in his diary, Himmler wrote, "The Jewish question has been solved in general government. The remaining work camps will be gradually liquidated." Operation Reinhard, Sobibor's role in the Nazi genocidal machine. In the annals of human history, few chapters are as dark and horrifying as Operation Reinhard, the Nazi regime's systematic plan to exterminate the Jewish population of Poland. Launched in October 1941, this deadly initiative would claim the lives of over 1.7 million Jews by its conclusion in November 1943. At its core, Operation Reinhard was the manifestation of the Nazis' genocidal ideology, fueled by anti-Semitism and a twisted vision of racial supremacy. The operation was named after Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Reich Main Security Office, who was assassinated by Czech resistance fighters in June 1942. The architect of this murderous enterprise was SS-Obergruppenführer Odilo Globoknik, a man whose brutality was matched only by his efficiency. Appointed by Heinrich Himmler himself on July 17, 1941, Globoknik oversaw the construction and operation of three main death camps: Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. These camps formed a lethal network, each designed with a single purpose: the rapid and systematic murder of Jews. Globoknik's fanaticism was evident in his statement to his staff. "Gentlemen, if ever there was a generation that had thrown off the old shackles, then it is our generation. we must have the courage to act brutally. The collaboration between SS officers at these camps was a grotesque example of shared expertise in mass murder. Techniques refined at one camp were quickly adopted at others. For instance, the gas chamber design used at Sobibor was based on the success of similar chambers at Belzec. SS-Obersturmführer Kurt Bolender, who served at both Sobibor and Treblinka, described the killing process. The Jews had to undress and were driven into the gas chambers. After 18 to 20 minutes, the gas chambers were opened and the corpses were taken out. This grim knowledge transfer extended to other aspects of camp operations, such as body disposal methods and deception tactics used to keep new arrivals calm. Globoknik's influence on Sobibor and Operation Reinhard cannot be overstated. Known for his ruthlessness, he demanded ever-increasing efficiency in the killing process. Under his direction, the camp's capacity was expanded, with new gas chambers added in autumn 1942. His frequent visits to Sobibor ensured that his vision of industrial-scale murder was being realized. In a chilling report to Himmler dated January 5, 1944, Globoknik boasted of the operation's success, stating that the entire Jewish action produced a total of 178,745,960 Reichsmark. This sum, equivalent to over $700 million in today's currency, represented the stolen wealth of countless murdered Jews. The logistics of death that fueled Operation Reinhard were staggering. The German railway system, the Reichsbahn, played a crucial role in transporting victims to Sobibor and other camps. These transports came not only from ghettos across Poland, but also from as far away as the Netherlands, France, and even Greece. On March 5, 1943, a transport arrived from Westerbork in the Netherlands, carrying 1,105 Jews, including 40 children under the age of 4. Within hours, all but a handful selected for labor had been murdered. The journey to Sobibor was a dehumanizing ordeal. Survivors like Thomas Blatt described being crammed into cattle cars with no food, water, or sanitation for days. "We were packed so tightly that the dead remained standing," Blatt recalled. In his memoir, From the Ashes of Sobibor, he further described the horrific conditions. The stench was unbearable. Children cried, the elderly moaned. Some people lost their minds. Upon arrival at Sobibor, between March 1942 and October 1943, an estimated 250,000 Jews were murdered, with some historians placing the number as high as 350,000. The economic aspects of Operation Reinhard were as calculated as its murderous efficiency. The theft of Jewish property was systematic and thorough. At Sobibor, a team of Jewish workers, known as the Goldjuden, Gold Jews, was forced to sort through victims' belongings, extracting anything of value. Gold teeth were pulled from corpses, jewelry and precious stones were catalogued, and currency from across Europe was collected. This stolen wealth was then funneled back to the Reich, helping to fund the Nazi war effort. The scale of this theft was enormous. In his post-war testimony, Kurt Gerstein, an SS officer who visited Sobibor, estimated that the value of gold and jewels taken from victims at the Operation Reinhard camps could have been as high as 100 million Reichsmarks. This systematic plunder was not limited to valuables. Even clothing and household goods were collected and redistributed to German civilians in what the Nazis cynically called Operation Reinhard Clothing Collection. The human cost of this plunder was incalculable. Esther Raab, one of the few survivors of Sobibor, later testified, "They took everything from us, not just our lives, but our memories, our culture, our very existence." Her words echo the totality of Operation Reinhard's impact. It was not just genocide, but an attempt to erase an entire people from history. Routine atrocities, the life of a death camp at Sobibor. As the train screeched to a halt at Sobibor's secluded railway siding, a new chapter of horror began for its passengers. The year was 1942, and the Nazi death machine was operating at full capacity. Sobibor, one of the 3 main Operation Reinhard extermination camps, had been methodically designed to process human beings from arrival to ash with ruthless efficiency. The reception process was a carefully orchestrated deception. SS-Obersturmführer Kurt Bolender, who served at Sobibor from April to November 1942, later testified, "The Jews were told that they had arrived at a transit camp and would be sent to work after delousing and a shower." This lie was the first step in a macabre dance of death that would unfold over the next few hours. The camp's layout, designed by SS-Obersturmführer Richard Thomalla, was specifically created to facilitate this deception, with the road to heaven, Himmelstrasse, leading directly from the reception area to the gas chambers. As bewildered prisoners stumbled onto the platform, SS guards and their auxiliaries, known as Traunicki men, barked orders in multiple languages. Families were brutally separated, with men directed to one side and women and children to another. The air was filled with confusion, cries of distress, and the acrid smell of fear. One particularly cruel practice was the lazaret or infirmary, where the elderly, infirm, or young children were taken directly to be shot under the guise of medical treatment. Kai Mengel, one of the few survivors, recalled the moment. "We arrived at Sobibor at 7 a.m. on May 13, 1943. Within minutes, my entire family was gone." The speed of the separation process was designed to prevent resistance and maintain the illusion of relocation rather than extermination. Engel, who was 27 at the time, was one of only 58 known survivors from the estimated 250,000 people who passed through Sobibor's gates. Prisoners were then herded into the undressing barracks, where they were forced to remove all clothing and relinquish any valuables. SS men, with a twisted sense of humor, had painted signs on the walls reading "To the showers" and "Cleanliness is health." These false assurances were part of the psychological manipulation intended to keep victims docile until the very end. In a particularly cruel twist, some SS officers would sometimes give receipts for valuables, promising their return after the delousing process. For a small minority, usually young men with specific skills, a different fate awaited. These individuals were selected for work details within the camp. Their reprieve from immediate death was no mercy. It merely prolonged their suffering and forced them to become unwilling participants in the Nazi killing machine. Selma Wienberg, one of the few Dutch Jews to survive Sobibor, described the living conditions for these workers. "We slept on wooden bunks, infested with lice. The food was barely enough to keep us alive." Work assignments were brutal and varied. Some were forced to sort through the belongings of the dead, others to cut the hair of women before they entered the gas chambers, and still others had the gruesome task of removing bodies from the chambers and burying or cremating them. Jules Schelvis, another Dutch survivor, recalled, "We worked from dawn to dusk, always under the threat of being beaten or shot. The smell of death was constant." Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Sobibor was its gas chambers. Initially, the camp had 3 gas chambers, each measuring 4x4 meters and capable of killing about 180 people at a time. In the autumn of 1942, under the direction of Odilo Globoknik, the camp's killing capacity was expanded with the addition of 3 more gas chambers. This expansion allowed for the murder of up to 1,300 people in a single operation. The infamous Action 1005, which aimed to erase evidence of mass killings, also reached Sobibor in 1943, leading to the exhumation and cremation of bodies previously buried in mass graves. The chambers were designed to appear as shower rooms, complete with fake shower heads. Carbon monoxide from a large gasoline engine was pumped into the sealed rooms. SS-Unterscharführer Erich Bauer, known as the Gasmaster of Sobibor, operated these chambers. In his post-war testimony, he coldly described the process. After the gassing, the chambers were opened and the corpses were removed by a group of Jewish workers. Bauer, who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, was later quoted as saying, "I had no feelings. It was just like squashing a bedbug." The psychological terror that permeated Sobibor was by design. Every aspect of the camp was calculated to break the spirit and will of its prisoners. Philip Bialowitz, who was forced to work in the camp, later wrote, "The SS wanted to destroy not only our bodies, but our humanity." The constant threat of death, the separation from loved ones, and the forced complicity in the deaths of others created an atmosphere of unrelenting despair. Twavi Blatt, another survivor, described the omnipresent fear. "Death was our constant companion. We breathed it, we smelled it, we lived with it every second of every day." Even the camp guards were not immune to the psychological toll. Some, like SS-Obersturmführer Gustav Wagner, known as the Beast, seemed to revel in cruelty. Wagner was notorious for his sadistic treatment of prisoners, often beating them to death for minor infractions or pure amusement. Others, however, turned to alcohol to numb themselves to the horrors they were perpetrating. Karl Frenzel, a guard at Sobibor, admitted after the war, "I drank schnapps in order to carry out this horrible duty." Yet, even in this darkest of places, small acts of resistance and attempts to maintain humanity persisted. Prisoners would secretly share information about the outside world, gleaned from the belongings of new arrivals. Some managed to keep diaries or create artwork, risking severe punishment if discovered. Alexander Pechersky, who would later lead the famous Sobibor Uprising, organized clandestine meetings to boost morale and plan resistance. Pechersky, a Soviet Jewish prisoner of war, arrived at Sobibor on September 23, 1943, and quickly became a central figure in the resistance movement. One poignant example of defiance came from the Sonderkommando workers forced to handle the bodies of the dead. Survivor Thomas Blatt recounted, "We would sometimes whisper a quick Kaddish, Jewish prayer for the dead, as we moved the bodies. It was all we could do to honor them." Blatt, who arrived at Sobibor at the age of 15, later wrote a memoir titled From the Ashes of Sobibor, providing one of the most detailed accounts of life inside the camp. The daily routine at Sobibor was a grotesque parody of normal life. The camp opened for business at 7 a.m. when the first transports arrived. By nightfall, thousands of lives had been systematically extinguished. SS-Obersturmführer Heinrich Babel described the relentless pace. "On some days, we handled 2 to 3 transports. The gas chambers were in operation from morning to evening. One of the largest single transports arrived on March 5, 1943, bringing 2,750 Jews from Majdanek concentration camp. Within hours, all but a handful selected for work had been murdered. As the sun set over the forests of eastern Poland, the gas chambers fell silent and the crematoria fires dimmed. But for those who remained alive in Sobibor, there was no respite. The knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of death and despair weighed heavily on every soul. Dov Freiberg, who spent 18 months in Sobibor, later wrote, "Every night I would pray to die in my sleep, just to escape the horror of another day." Flames of resistance, the Sobibor Uprising's desperate gamble for freedom. In the suffocating atmosphere of Sobibor, where death was a daily companion and hope seemed a distant memory, a spark of defiance was quietly kindled. It was the summer of 1943, and the gears of the Nazi extermination machine had been grinding relentlessly for over a year at this remote death camp in eastern Poland. Yet, amidst the despair and constant threat of death, a daring plan was taking shape. A plan that would culminate in one of the most significant acts of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. The seeds of rebellion were sown with the arrival of a group of Soviet Jewish prisoners of war on September 23, 1943. Among them was Lieutenant Alexander Sasha Pechersky, a charismatic and experienced military man who would become the linchpin of the uprising. Pechersky, born in 1909 in Kremenchuk, Ukraine, had been captured by the Germans in October 1941 and survived several POW camps before being sent to Sobibor. He quickly connected with Leon Feldhendler, a Polish Jew who had already been contemplating resistance. Feldhendler, the son of a rabbi from Zolkiewka, had been in Sobibor since its early days and had witnessed the camp's evolution into a killing factory. Together, they formed the core of a secret committee dedicated to planning an escape. The challenges were immense. Sobibor was a fortress of death, designed to process and exterminate thousands of people with horrifying efficiency. Surrounded by minefields, patrolled by armed guards, and monitored constantly, the camp seemed an impregnable fortress. SS-Obersturmführer Karl Frenzel, one of the camp's most brutal overseers, boasted, "No one has ever escaped from Sobibor, and no one ever will." Yet, as Pechersky later wrote in his memoirs, "To die with arms in our hands was the only way to leave Sobibor." The plan that emerged was as audacious as it was desperate. The conspirators aimed to lure SS officers to their deaths one by one, seize their weapons, and create a window of opportunity for a mass escape. Every detail had to be meticulously planned and executed with split-second timing. Stanislaw Shlomo Schmeisner, a young Polish Jew who had survived in Sobibor for 18 months due to his skills as a goldsmith, was tasked with creating copies of keys to the camp's armory. Schmeisner later recalled, "I knew that if I made even the slightest mistake, it would mean death not just for me, but for everyone involved." The smallest hint of the plan could spell disaster, not just for the plotters, but for all the prisoners in the camp. As the days ticked by, tension mounted. The rebels knew that time was not on their side. Rumors of the camp's imminent closure were circulating, and the Nazis had begun to cremate bodies to hide evidence of their crimes. On October 1st, 1943, a transport of Jews from the Vilna ghetto arrived at Sobibor, among them several members of the United Partisan Organization who had participated in the Vilna ghetto uprising. Their presence further galvanized the resolve of the Sobibor conspirators. The date was set for October 14th, 1943, chosen in part because it was a Thursday when many of the senior SS officers would be away from the camp. On that fateful day, the camp seemed to go about its grim routine as usual, but beneath the surface, hearts raced and palms sweated as the conspirators prepared to put their plan into action. At precisely 4 p.m., the first phase began. SS-Obersturmführer Siegfried Greitschus, head of the guards, was lured to a storeroom under the pretext of trying on a leather coat, where he was quietly killed with an axe wielded by Yehuda Lerner, a 17-year-old prisoner. Over the next hour, 11 more SS men and several guards were similarly dispatched. Among them was SS-Obersturmführer Rudolf Beckmann, killed in the tailor's workshop by Schmeisner and his fellow conspirators. As the clock struck 5 p.m., the second phase of the plan kicked into high gear. Pechersky gave the signal, and chaos erupted. Prisoners armed with stolen weapons and improvised tools attacked the remaining guards. Chaim Engel and his girlfriend Selma Wienberg, who had met and fallen in love in the camp, worked together to cut the camp's telephone lines. A mad dash for the main gate began. Arkady Weishpapier, a Soviet POW, used his strength to break open the door to the armory, allowing the rebels to arm themselves. In the ensuing melee, the air was filled with gunfire, shouts, and the acrid smell of smoke as buildings were set ablaze. Thomas Twavi Blatt, then a 16-year-old prisoner who participated in the uprising, later recalled, "It was like a volcano erupting, years of pent-up emotion and frustration exploding in one violent moment." Blatt, who had lost his entire family in Sobibor, managed to escape but was shot in the jaw during the breakout. Of the approximately 600 prisoners in Sobibor that day, roughly 300 managed to break through the camp's fences and flee into the surrounding forests. However, freedom was far from assured. The escapees faced a gauntlet of dangers: Nazi patrols, hostile local populations, and the unforgiving wilderness of the Polish countryside. Kurt Tycho, a Czech Jew who escaped during the revolt, later described the terrifying moments after breaching the camp's perimeter. "We ran blindly, not knowing where we were going, just away from that hell." In the immediate aftermath of the revolt, SS reinforcements descended on Sobibor, launching a massive manhunt. Many of the escapees were quickly recaptured or killed. Some were betrayed by local villagers, while others succumbed to exhaustion, hunger, or the harsh elements. Esther Raab, one of the survivors, later described the terrifying days following the escape. "We ran through forests and swamps, eating berries and roots, always looking over our shoulders, never knowing if the next moment would be our last." Raab and her fellow escapee Zelda Metz were sheltered by a sympathetic Polish family, the Mazureks, who hid them at great personal risk until the area was liberated by the Soviet army. Despite the odds, a small number of the Sobibor rebels managed to evade capture and survive the war. Pechersky, along with a group of fellow Soviet POWs, eventually made contact with Soviet partisans and continued to fight against the Nazis. He survived the war and testified at trials of Nazi war criminals, including the Adolf Eichmann trial in 1961. Others, like Feldhendler, found shelter with sympathetic Poles. Tragically, Feldhendler was killed on April 2, 1945, in Lublin, Poland, in an act of post-war anti-Semitic violence, just months after the area had been liberated. The Sobibor uprising had far-reaching consequences. Although many of the escapees did not survive, their act of resistance dealt a significant blow to the Nazi extermination program. In the wake of the revolt, SS Chief Heinrich Himmler ordered Sobibor to be razed to the ground. The last Jewish prisoners remaining in Sobibor, forced to dismantle the camp, were shot on November 23, 1943. In a final act of concealment, the Nazis planted trees over the site, attempting to erase all traces of their crimes. Survivor Philip Bialowitz later reflected, "Our victory was in the revolt itself. In those few hours, we seized control of our destiny. We were no longer helpless victims. We were fighters." Bialowitz, who was only 14 at the time of the uprising, went on to become one of the most vocal survivors, sharing his story with audiences around the world until his death in 2016. A final injustice: how the Nazis tried to make Sobibor disappear. As the smoke from the Sobibor uprising cleared on October 14, 1943, the Nazi machinery of death and deception shifted into high gear. The revolt, led by Alexander Pechersky and Leon Feldhendler, had not only dealt a blow to the camp's operations, but had also exposed a vulnerability in the Reich's carefully constructed facade of secrecy. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the final solution, wasted no time in issuing a chilling directive. Sobibor was to be wiped from the face of the earth, its horrors buried beneath a blanket of soil and silence. The task of obliterating Sobibor fell to a group of SS officers led by Odilo Globoknik, the overseer of Operation Reinhard. With ruthless efficiency, they set about dismantling the infrastructure of genocide. The gas chambers, which had claimed the lives of an estimated 250,000 Jews, were the first to go. These chambers, disguised as showers, had been the site of unspeakable horror. Survivor Esther Raab later recalled, "The screams, I can still hear them in my nightmares." Brick by brick, the buildings that had witnessed such atrocities were torn down. The barracks that had housed prisoners awaiting their fate were reduced to rubble. Even the railway spur, which had delivered countless victims to their doom, was uprooted and carted away. But physical destruction was only the beginning. In a macabre twist of irony, the Nazis forced the remaining Jewish prisoners, those who had not participated in or escaped during the uprising, to assist in erasing the evidence of their own people's suffering. These unfortunate souls were compelled to sift through the ashes of their murdered brethren, grinding any remaining bone fragments to dust. It was a final, cruel indignity inflicted upon those who had already endured so much. One of these prisoners, Chaim Engel, who had survived the uprising with his girlfriend Selma Weinberg, later testified, "We worked like automatons, trying not to think about what we were doing. To think was to invite madness." As the last traces of the camp were being erased, the Nazis implemented the next phase of their cover-up. Trees were hastily planted across the site, their roots sinking into soil saturated with the ashes of the dead. A farmhouse was constructed, and the area was converted into an agricultural setting. The transformation was so complete that to an unsuspecting eye, it might have appeared that nothing but peaceful farmland had ever existed there. This grim landscaping project was overseen by SS-Obersturmführer Karl Frenzel, who would later claim in his trial that he was merely following orders. This erasure of Sobibor was part of a larger Nazi effort known as Action 1005, initiated in 1942 as the tide of war began to turn against Germany. The operation, led by SS-Standartenführer Paul Blobel, aimed to destroy evidence of mass killings across Eastern Europe. As Blobel later testified at the Nuremberg trials, "I received an oral order from Gruppenführer Müller in Berlin to go to Einsatzgruppe C and wipe out the traces of executions carried out by the Einsatzgruppen in the east." This included not only Sobibor, but also other death camps like Belzec and Treblinka. At Belzec, for instance, the Nazis went so far as to exhume and burn over 400,000 bodies in a desperate attempt to hide their crimes. The Nazis' attempts to cover their tracks were not limited to physical evidence. They also engaged in a campaign of misinformation and deception. False documents were created, records were destroyed, and euphemisms were employed to obscure the true nature of their actions. The term special treatment, Sonderbehandlung, was used in place of execution, while evacuation often meant deportation to death camps. In one particularly cynical move, postcards were sent from Sobibor to the families of victims, dated weeks after their deaths, to create the illusion that they were still alive. As Hannah Arendt would later observe, "The trouble with Eichmann was precisely that so many were like him, and that the many were neither perverted nor sadistic, that they were, and still are, terribly and terrifyingly normal." Despite these efforts, the truth of Sobibor could not be entirely suppressed. In the years following the war, survivors, historians, and investigators worked tirelessly to uncover what had happened at the site. One of the key figures in this effort was Yitzhak Arad, a Holocaust survivor who later became a prominent historian. Arad's meticulous research, including interviews with survivors and analysis of Nazi documents, helped piece together the grim reality of Sobibor's operations. His 1987 book, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, The Operation Reinhard Death Camps, became a seminal work in Holocaust studies. Archaeological excavations at the site have also played a crucial role in uncovering the truth. In 2007, a team led by Israeli archaeologist Yoram Haimi began extensive work at Sobibor. Their discoveries have been profound and heartrending. Personal items such as jewelry, keys, and children's toys have been unearthed, providing tangible links to the victims. A particularly poignant find was a silver pendant inscribed with Frankfurt am Main, Caroline, and the date March 10, 1903, which was traced to a young woman named Caroline Cohn. In 2014, the team made a significant breakthrough when they uncovered the foundations of the gas chambers, definitively establishing their location and size. Jaime, whose own family members perished at Sobibor, said of the work, "We are exposing the hell that the Nazis created here." The quest for justice for Sobibor's victims has been long and often frustrating. While some perpetrators faced trial and conviction, many others escaped punishment. One of the most notorious cases was that of John Demjanjuk, accused of being a guard at Sobibor. After a lengthy legal battle spanning decades and multiple countries, including a death sentence in Israel that was later overturned, Demjanjuk was finally convicted in Germany in 2011, though he died while his appeal was pending. His case highlighted the complexities of prosecuting Nazi war criminals so many years after the events. SS officer Karl Frenzel, who had played a key role in Sobibor's operations, was another who faced justice, albeit belatedly. Arrested in 1962, Frenzel was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment in 1985. However, due to his age and health, he was released after serving only 16 years. His case highlighted the challenges of prosecuting Nazi war criminals so many years after the events. At his trial, Sobibor survivor Thomas Blatt confronted Frenzel, asking, "Why did you murder my family?" Frenzel's response, "I was just following orders," echoed the infamous defense used by many Nazi officials. Today, The site of Sobibor stands as a solemn memorial to those who perished there. In 1965, a monument was erected featuring a large mound of ashes and crushed bones collected from the cremation pits. The inscription, in Polish, Hebrew, and Dutch, reads, "In everlasting memory of the Jewish victims of Nazi terror murdered in the death camp at Sobibor, 250,000 Jewish men, women and children from Poland, USSR, Holland, Czechoslovakia, France, Germany and Austria." The memorial includes a symbolic road to heaven, a path lined with stones bearing the names of victims, leading to the site of the gas chambers. In recent years, efforts to preserve and educate about Sobibor have intensified. In 2020, a new museum and visitor center opened at the site, providing a comprehensive overview of the camp's history and the stories of its victims and survivors. Interactive exhibits and digital reconstructions offer visitors a glimpse into the horrors of Sobibor, ensuring that the truth the Nazis tried so hard to bury will never be forgotten. One of the most powerful exhibits is a collection of personal items found during excavations, including a child's shoe, a woman's comb, and a man's watch, silent testaments to lives brutally cut short. As we delve into the shadows of history, Sobibor's legacy lingers like a haunting whisper. This deceptively tranquil patch of Polish earth, once a factory of death, now stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As we part, let us carry with us the words of Sobibor survivor Thomas Blatt. To remain silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all. May Sobibor's story inspire us to speak out against injustice and to cherish the preciousness of every human life. For in remembering, we ensure that the voices silenced at Sobibor continue to echo through time, urging us towards a more compassionate world.